Welcome back everybody for our penultimate video in an 8-part series on the charity investment governance principles. These are a set of principles that have been put together by charities, and they've been led by a steering group that consisted of the Charity Finance Group, NCVO, WCVA, ACF and the Charities Responsible Investment Network. The project was generously funded by a group of philanthropic foundations, and the principles focus in on the practice in England and Wales and the regulatory requirements there. Principle 6, equity, diversity and inclusion. It's a principle I'm going to explore with Gail Cunningham, who led on the principle development. And for those who haven't seen the first 6 episodes, please feel free to go and find the recordings that are stored at broadstone.co.uk and have a look online at the CIGP.org.uk for the principles in full. So Gail, why is this principle so important?
Yeah, this is a really interesting principle and one that some charities find really challenging, which I know we'll come on to talk about. So what this principle sets out, and we look at how do you make sure you have an inclusive approach where you've got a diversity of backgrounds, and recognizing that having a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives among your decision makers can lead to stronger decision making. You can avoid groupthink and all of the dangers that you can have there. How do you get a broad range of trustees and staff with different perspectives and experiences involved? And how do you make that actually manageable? Because obviously it can't just be a free-for-all where everyone gets to have an opinion all of the time. So what this principle really dives into is actually, what does EDI mean in practice, and what are the practical things you can be doing?
Yeah, and I think it's those practical steps that we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute. But so for the viewers that are watching this, what do you think the outcomes are going to be for those organisations that do implement the guidance around these principles?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the first things we do, actually, you'll see when you go through the practice on the website, is it flips it over and it starts from inclusion, then works its way through diversity and then equity. And we were really lucky on this to be working with a couple of fantastic consultants from the Social Investment Consultancy and from the Social Justice Collective, who were real experts in EDI and really helped us work through what this all meant. And what was important there is looking at starting from an inclusive approach. So how can different voices be heard? And particularly with investments, where I think people really struggle to see, well, how do you apply EDI to investments? And how do you do it if people haven't got the investment expertise, or there's lots of loud voices with investment expertise, perhaps drowning out other stakeholders and other voices? And so it's looking at that inclusive practice. Then also looking at diversity and considering, what does diversity mean in the broadest possible sense? So not just box ticking, but actually understanding what it means to have a diversity of views, a diversity of perspectives. And then equitable practice. What does equity look like? And we explore some of the really key areas in investments. And that might mean taking a responsible investment approach, looking at impact investments, social investments. It might mean, if you're an endowed charity, looking at the origins of some of that wealth that your charity has. And then a host of other kind of equitable investment practice around perhaps climate change or modern slavery.
Yeah, and I'll just moving back to those practical steps that we can look at talking to our audience about how to actually comply with these principles. And again, can you just maybe give a bit of a realistic overview of what time frame you're hoping to see the change of the impact here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we should emphasize with all of the principles that this is not a quick exercise. It's not meant to just be a quick tick box and yet we're already doing all of this great. It's about saying, where are the areas of our practice that we could improve on? One of the things that was really interesting in the consultation we did is we asked charities to respond and said how well they understood the principle and whether they felt the principle was achievable. And we got really high scores for both, which was great. But one of the things that was interesting to note is that for this principle around EDI, it was slightly lower in terms of both understanding and achievability. And I would say that in terms of the practical steps charities could take, as I said, we've already talked about inclusion being really important. And if you get an inclusive culture right, a lot of the other things will start to stem from that. I should also emphasize that for larger charities, a lot of the practice is recommended, but for smaller charities, some of the later practices consider, because we realise it's really tricky to devote sufficient time to all of these, and we don't want people to rush. We want people to really consider what to do. The other point I will point out, and this is some interesting learning that came out of the consultation, is we had a feature in there where we said to people, If you're only undertaking a little bit of this practice or none of this practice, if you don't think this is, or you think it's less achievable than the other principles, or you don't understand it as well as the other principles, we said to people, did the examples and explainers help in your understanding? Because this principle in particular has loads of examples, loads of resources. You could spend ages doing it. And again, that's where we're saying to people, don't rush, take your time, see what your charity might want to consider and focus in on that. But we said to people in the consultation, we said, did the examples and explainers help? And interestingly, a number of those who said that a little or none of the practice was undertaken rather than all of the practice or most of the practice, those respondents, almost all of those respondents, said that they hadn't read the examples and explainers that were available. So my one slightly strict point would be, if this is an area you find challenging, explore it, take the time, really calmly, just to work through it, read through it, see if there's some resources that can help in your understanding. Don't try and do it all at once. Don't be intimidated by it, but just take those steps that are really appropriate for your charity's context. But please do explore the explainers and examples if you feel like you don't understand it or you feel like none of it's achievable.
Those explainers and examples are just so useful as well, because they put things into a lot more context. Especially for readers who are trying to take in all of the principles together. But for this particular principle, it's obviously quite clear that this might be quite a complicated principle to put into practice. But do you think there are any short-term wins that you could maybe explore for implementation?
Yeah, I think there's both some short-term wins and then some more complex things that will obviously take a longer amount of time. And one of the things I would encourage those who are using the principles is to really think about what could be enacted quickly and what's actually going to take a lot longer. So definitely the points about an inclusive culture, and really thinking about what the culture of the board is like, how trustees interact with each other, how staff members and other stakeholders and committee members, how those voices are heard, is really important. On the diversity point, thinking about that in its broadest sense, not just about ticking a box about particular characteristics, but actually what does diversity of thought look like? And what might that mean for recruitment to your trustee board or to your investment committee and so on? And then the equity points, and obviously these will be challenging for a lot of charities when you're looking at perhaps the origins of your endowment or climate justice and all those things and how that relates to your investments. And so I would say just go slowly, take your time and explore, pick one thing to explore and explore that in detail rather than trying to just tick off and go, yeah, we already do all of this. Actually, what would it mean to be doing it in depth?
And just Gail, bringing it back again to those smaller charities, and I know you mentioned earlier that they have more considers rather than recommends within the principles, and that probably focuses on the fact that they typically have less resources. So for those smaller organisations, what is the main objective that you want to see here for boards looking to implement?
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, for smaller charities, only one of them is recommend, which is around inclusion and all those points around an inclusive culture, which I think is important whatever size you're operating at. A lot of them are consider, and also you'll find in the equitable practice it's considering, and so you've got that double consider to say really just focus on what your charity can focus on. Some of that might be around your charity has very particular purposes, and so you're very interested in climate change, or you're very interested in modern slavery and how those things are impacting on your investment portfolio. And I think the main thing is to say you need some big overarching goals, but also if you have a particular area you want to drill down into. But there's a real recognition within the principles that some of this will be challenging for smaller charities, or indeed for charities who haven't addressed this before, who are large but perhaps haven't explored this. So my main thing to say would be, don't be scared of it. Just explore it calmly and work out what applies to your charity and actually what you could enact effectively.
Yeah, and I just really believe in this principle as a whole. I think it's important not only to the long-term success of businesses, but it also helps ensure that management of reputational risk, and those who are looking to implement these principles all the way up to best practice, they might find that it takes a long time, but ultimately the aim is here that it will help yield the best rewards. So that, I guess, is completing our penultimate episode, and next week we will be exploring openness and accountability in our final episode, episode 8. If you haven't yet, then please go to broadstone.co.uk, where you'll be able to find all of the other videos that we've recorded as part of this series. And also please remember to log on to CIGP.org.uk, and it's a free to access website, and all the principles are in full with all of those examples that Gail spoke about earlier. You can also download PDF to make it easier for you to consider all of the principles. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next time for the last one.